taken refuge within the walls were slaughtered by his companions, not one escaping. The altars were levelled to the ground, the monuments broken in pieces. The great library of parchments and charters was burnt. The holy relics were trodden under foot, and the church itself, with all the monastic buildings, burnt to the ground. 4 days later, the Danes, having devastated the whole country round and collected an enormous booty, marched away against Huntingdon. Edmund and Egbert remained but a few hours with the monks who had escaped from the sack of Croyland, for as soon as they saw the flames mounting up above the church, they knew that the Danes had accomplished their usual work of massacre, and there being no use in their making further stay, they started upon their journey. They travelled by easy stages, for time was of no value to them. For the most part their way lay among forests, and when once they had passed south of Thetford they had no fear of meeting with the Danes. Sometimes they slept at farmhouses or villages, being everywhere hospitably received, the more so when it was known that Edmund was the son of the brave ealdorman Eldred. But the news which they brought of the disastrous battle of Kesteven, and the southward march of the great Danish army, filled everyone with consternation. The maids and matrons wept with terror at the thought of the coming of these terrible heathen, and although the men everywhere spoke of resistance to the last, the prospect seemed so hopeless that even the bravest were filled with grief and despair. Many spoke of leaving their homes and retiring with their wives and families, their serfs and herds, to the country of the West Saxons, where alone there appeared any hope of a successful resistance being made. Wherever they went, Edmund and Egbert brought by their news lamentation and woe to the households they entered, and at last Edmund said, "Egbert, let us enter no more houses until we reach the end of our journey. Wherever we go we are messengers of evil, and turn houses of feasting into abodes of grief. Every night we have the same sad story to tell, and have to witness the weeping and wailing of women. 1,000 times better were it to sleep among the woods, at any rate until we are among the West Saxons, where our news may cause indignation and rage at least, but where it will arouse a brave resolve to resist to the last, instead of the hopelessness of despair." Egbert thoroughly agreed with the lad, and henceforth they entered no houses save to buy bread and mead. Of meat they had plenty, for as they passed through the forests Wolf was always upon the alert, and several times found a wild boar in his lair, and kept him at bay until Edmund and Egbert ran up with spears and swords and slew the wild beast. This supplied them amply with meat, and gave them indeed far more than they could eat, but they exchanged portions of the flesh for bread in the villages. At last they came down upon the Thames near London, and crossed the river, journeyed west. They were now in the kingdom of the West Saxons, the most warlike and valiant of the peoples of England, and who had gradually extended their sway over the whole of the country. The union was indeed but little more than nominal, as the other kings retained their thrones, paying only a tribute to the West Saxon monarchs. As Egbert had predicted, their tale of the battle of Kesteven had aroused no feeling save that of wrath and a desire for vengeance upon the Danes. Swords were grasped, and all swore by the saints of what should happen to the invaders should they set foot in Wessex. The travellers felt their spirits rise at the martial and determined aspect of the people. "It is a sad pity," Egbert said to Edmund one day, "that these West Saxons had not had time to unite England firmly together before the Danes set foot on the island. It was our divisions which have rendered their task so far easy. Northumbria, Mercia, and East Anglia have one by one been invaded, and their kings have had to fight single-handed against them, whereas had one strong king reigned over the whole country, so that all our force could have been exerted against the invader wherever he might land, the Danes would never have won a foot of our soil. The sad day of Kesteven showed at least that we are able to fight the Danes man for man. The first day we beat them, though they were in superior numbers. The second we withstood them all day, although they were 10 to 1 against us, and they would never have triumphed even then had our men listened to their leaders and kept their ranks. I do not believe that even the West Saxons could have fought more bravely than did our men on that day. But they are better organized, their king is energetic and determined, and when the Danes invade Wessex they will find themselves opposed by the whole people, instead of merely a hastily raised assemblage gathered in the neighbourhood." They presently approached Reading, where there was a royal fortress, in which King Ethelred and his brother Alfred were residing. "It is truly a fine city," Edmund said as he approached it. "Its walls are strong and high, and the royal palace which rises above them is indeed a stately building." They crossed the river and entered the gates of the town. There was great bustle and traffic in the streets. Cynings or nobles passed along accompanied by parties of thanes. Serfs laden with fuel or provisions made their way in from the surrounding country, while freemen, with their shields flung across their shoulders and their swords by their sides, stalked with an independent air down the streets. The travellers approached the royal residence. The gates were open and none hindered their entrance, for all who had business were free to enter the royal presence and to lay their complaints or petitions before the king. Entering, they found themselves in a large hall. The lower end of this was occupied by many people who conversed together in little groups, or awaited the summons of the king. Across the upper end of the room was a raised dais, and in the centre of this was a wide chair capable of holding 3 persons. The back and sides were high and richly carved. A table supported by 4 carved and gilded legs stood before it. 2 persons were seated in the chair. One was a man of 3 or 24. The other was his junior by some 2 years. Both wore light crowns of gold, somewhat different in their fashion. Before the younger was a parchment, an inkhorn, and pens. King Ethelred was a man of a pleasant face, but marked by care and by long vigils and rigorous fastings. Alfred was a singularly handsome young prince, with an earnest and intellectual face. Both had their faces shaven smooth. Ethelred wore his hair parted in the middle and falling low on each side of the face, but Alfred's was closely cut. On the table near the younger brother stood a silver harp. Edmund looked with great curiosity and interest on the young prince, who was famous throughout England for his great learning, his wisdom, and sweetness of temper. Although the youngest of the king's brothers, he had always been regarded as the future king of England, and had his father survived until he reached the age of manhood, he would probably have succeeded directly to the throne. The law of primogeniture was by no means strictly observed among the Saxons. A younger brother of marked ability or of distinguished prowess in war being often chosen by a father to succeed him in place of his older brothers. Alfred has been his father's favourite son. He had when a child been consecrated by the Pope as future King of England, and his 2 journeys to Rome and his residence at the court of the Frankish king had, with his own great learning and study, given him a high prestige and a reputation among his people as one learned in the ways of the world. Although but a prince, his authority in the kingdom nearly equalled that of his brother, and it was he rather than Ethelred whom men regarded as the prop and stay of the Saxons in the perils which were now threatening them. One after another, persons advanced to the table and laid their complaints before the king. In case of dispute, both parties were present, and were often accompanied by witnesses. Ethelred and Alfred listened attentively to all that was said on both sides, and then gave their judgment. An hour passed, and then, seeing that no one else approached the table, Egbert, taking Edmund by the hand, led him forward and knelt before the royal table. "Whom have we here?" the king said. "This youth is by his attire one of noble race, but I know not his face." "We have come, Sir King," Egbert said, "as fugitives and supplements to you. This is Edmund, the son of Ealdorman Eldred, a valiant Cyning of West Anglia, who, after fighting bravely against the Danes near Thetford, joined Earl Algar, and died by his side on the fatal field of Kesteven. He had himself proposed to come hither to you, and to ask you to accept him as your thane, and on the morn of the battle he charged me, if he fell, to bring hither his son to you, and we pray you to accept, in token of our homage to you, these vessels." And here he placed 2 handsome goblets of silver gilt upon the table. "I pray you rise," the king said. "I have assuredly heard of the brave Eldred, and will gladly receive his son as my thane. I had not heard of Eldred's death, though 2 days since the rumour of a heavy defeat of the East Angles at Kesteven, and the sacrilegious destruction of the holy houses of Bardenay, Croyland, and Medeshamstead reached our ears. Were you present at the battle?" "I was, Sir King.